Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to speak at your conference. My name is David Sperbeck. I'm a clinical neuropsychologist, and I've been practicing in Anchorage, Alaska for 45 years. I want to talk to you today about a study that I constructed and completed over the last basically 35 years. This is a longitudinal study of cognitive functioning across lifespan. And essentially, it is a spin-off of a study that I conducted during my training at the University of Rochester, and then later in my neuropsychology residency at VA Hospital in New York through Cornell University. Essentially, the researchers Costa and McCrae developed a personality trait theory proposing that in adult personalities, there are essentially 5 factors that should be evaluated and looked at and can help us understand people's functioning throughout their adulthood. Those 5 factors are essentially neuroticism, extroversion, openness to experience, conscientiousness, and agreeability. This study by Costa and McCrae was completed in 1978. In 1979 through 1980, I completed a study, cross-sectional analysis of individuals basically between the ages of 25 and 75. And at that time discovered that individuals who were open to experience, that is, prone to engage in novel experiences, new ideas, imagery, fantasy, and so forth, were more likely to report autobiographical memories. And not only did they report more memories across the lifespan, regardless of their age, but they also had faster memory retrieval times than their closed to experience counterparts. Closed to experience individuals tend to be characterized by being somewhat stubborn, resistant to new experiences, dogmatic, unwilling to change, sort of fixed in their routines and habits and so forth. Well, I left New York and came here to Alaska 45 years ago or thereabouts, and over the next 15 years observed in my patients certainly that the older patients who tended to be higher functioning also tended to be much more open to experience and willing to try new therapies, willing to engage in new experiences, willing to follow new recommendations, whether it was for therapy or exercise or even medications, that type of thing, than the patients that I had who tended to be closed to experience. So I constructed a longitudinal study this time in which I started out with about 350 people and eventually recruited 220 adults between the ages of 55 and 57 who agreed not only to be evaluated in their personality functions, but also agreed to be cognitively assessed every 5 years for 25 years. This particular age cohort was very well educated. I recruited them mostly from hospitals and clinics that I had privileges at, that I was practicing at. It was largely a female population, 58% female, 42% males, and very well educated. Average educational level was over 16 years. So these were mostly nurses, doctors, therapists, counselors, and so forth, all who agreed to participate in the 25-year follow-up study. Everyone was assessed for their personality traits using Costa and McRae's 5-factor personality instrument known as the NEO, Personality and Experiential Inventory. And I eventually tested folks and determined that 115 of the people were assessed as open to experience, and of that group, of the initial 220 people, 115 were assessed as open to experience, and 105 were assessed as closed to experience. I began testing folks on 4 different outcome measures. The first was the Stroop test, which is a test of executive functioning, common neuropsychological test. The second was the Halstead category test, once again another test of executive functioning that assesses a person's ability to anticipate logical sequences, understand complex patterns, and engage in conceptual reasoning. The third test was the digit span in reverse, which is a pretty complicated, difficult test, and in which the participant is asked to assess and recall a list of randomly presented numbers in reverse order, starting with 2 and going up to 7 random numbers. And then finally, the final test was the Bender Visual Motor Gestalt recall test, in which an individual is asked to copy 9 designs, and then 20 minutes later, after they completed that and had several cognitive tests in between, would be asked to recall those 9 designs and to reconstruct them from memory. And that is a test of incidental memory, because the individual is not informed in advance that they will have to remember the original 9 design. So it's pretty complicated and difficult test. If you would go to slide number 1, please. I want to go straight to the results and present these to you. Slide number 1 is a slide depicting the mean Stroop test scores by age, and as you will see, actually, I think that one you showed me there is the Bender Visual Motor Gestalt recall test. I can start with that. Doesn't matter what order I go in, but what I generally want to say about the results is that they were all very consistent. And if you can see the scores listed here, you will see that the blue line is the regression line of cognitive performance for the open to experience personalities. The red line is the regression line for the closed to experience personalities. And one thing I want to point out is that over the 25 years and 6 testing periods, you will see a significant degree of attrition over that time. Something that I anticipated, but I did not anticipate the degree of attrition that we had. We started out with, as I mentioned, 220 original participants in the cohort. After the second testing, which was in, the first testing was in 1995. The second testing in 2000 had a total of 187 people. The next testing had a total of 142. The fourth testing was a total of 118 people. The fifth testing was a total of 70 people. And by the time the cohort reached the ages of 80 to 82, we only had 20 participants left. Certainly, there were a number of reasons for that attrition. One of the major reasons was people who are getting older in Alaska don't like to stay in Alaska. And so we had a fairly significant number of people just leave the state and drop out of the study, just due to retirement purposes, but also, as you might expect, between 2019 and 2023 or 2020, the last testing, we had a significant number of people. Attrition rate increased due to the COVID pandemic, and either people were not available or they actually were deceased during that time period. So certainly one of the weaknesses of this study was the high attrition rate. But as you can see, and is reflected in all 4 of these slides, the regression line for the cohort of open to experience personalities was less steep, and it was very clear, not only clinically and anecdotally over my 45-year practice, but certainly in this study, that individuals who were close to experience had a steeper drop off in their rate of cognitive decline at a younger age, and that as they aged, that difference increased over time until both groups obviously had significant cognitive decline into their late 70s and 80s. But as you can see from at least the first, I think it's slide 4 in your presentation there. Yeah, here, this would be, I believe this is slide number 1. As you can see here from all of these slides, the regression rate and the decline is parallel across all 4 different outcome measures of cognitive performance, and that it appears to drop off in the middle to late 60s for the individuals close to experience, and the folks who are open to experience have relatively preserved performance until their late 70s and early 80s. And this seems to be reflected in other studies of personality neuroscience, where individuals who are open to experience tend to participate in more complicated activities throughout their life and into their older age. For example, they have more complicated job descriptions, even into their middle and early aging. They tend to have less inflammatory markers. They tend to engage in more educational activities later in life. And there does not seem to be a correlation or a connection between IQ and personality functioning. So that does not appear to be the explanation. What I have observed and have sort of concluded on my own through my own research and analysis of the literature is that when individuals are open to experience, they engage in new experiences, novel experiences. And in order to do that, you by necessity have to develop novel neuronal pathways in order to relate new information to past information and be able to interpret it. So the more novel experiences you have, and the more active your cognitive engagement is going to be in terms of your multisensory input, the manner in which you encode information, new information, so that it is available for later retrieval, and consequently tends to reinforce and actually create new neuronal pathways, which is essentially the functional definition of neuroplasticity. And newer and recent studies over the last 10 years have demonstrated that it is actually possible for older adults to demonstrate hippocampal neurogenesis and the development of new brain cells. And our colleagues in Spain and Switzerland are certainly finding that in some of their most recent research. So in any case, I think that the process of engaging in new experiences and opening oneself to new possibilities, new reading, new thinking, new social experiences, new behavioral experiences, obviously are all forms of helping to preserve cognitive functioning into later life. This doesn't necessarily mean that if you're open to experience, you're not going to develop or suffer from a neurodegenerative disorder. And in fact, all of the participants in this study were carefully screened for medical status to rule out the possibility of chronic disease or neurodegenerative disorders. We specifically wanted a cohort of individuals who were healthy, and for both open and closed to experience individuals. So in any case, that's my study. Those are my results. I'm anxious to see in the future more studies, perhaps of functional MRIs to analyze the extent to which there may or may not be differences between open and closed personalities in their electrical functioning, the cerebral functioning at the subcortical levels as well. I would appreciate any questions that you may have. That's essentially the majority of what I had to present, and I thank you for your attention.